Join Hans and Scotty at Tim Dahle Nissan Southtown today from noon to 3. 11155 South Jordan Gateway in South Jordan. Tim Dahle, home of the Forever Warranty. DJ PK, we're joined now by Matt Murschel, UCF and college football writer for the Orlando Sentinel. Matt, good morning.
Good morning. How you guys doing today?
We are doing well. Here it is, Game 12. It seems like just the other day we were talking to you on a spring football tour and summer camp, anticipating how this season would go. Has it gone largely as expected for UCF?
I think yes. I mean, when we began the season, I thought to myself, if they got to 5 wins, 6 wins, that was probably going to be a pretty good season for them. Based on what we saw in the off season, having 70 new players, dealing with a new coaching staff, coming into the Big 12, especially a coaching staff that in many cases guys hadn't been coaching for a while, and Scott Frost, head coach. So, I think this is kind of how it went. Now, there were opportunities for them to maybe steal a game here or there, but it just didn't happen, and injuries have come up and things like that. But otherwise, this is probably where I thought they'd be. Some fans would have liked to see more, but again, I think this is what you expect from a year one.
What do you think that Scott Frost did the first time around when he had such great success can be translated to have him do it again this time?
I think the biggest factor is, honestly, it comes down to culture. I think for what Scott did the first time around is he really created an unbelievable culture at UCF. And the players really they bought into what he was doing. They wanted to take ownership in the team. They did practices on their own. If a practice didn't go well and the coaching staff was ready to end it, the players would step up and say, no, we're going to go again. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of thing that helped lead them to the success they had in the 2017 season when they went undefeated and went and beat Auburn in the Peach Bowl. I think he's getting there this time around. Again, a first year is very difficult to do. You're bringing in guys from the transfer portal. You're bringing in recruits that you didn't necessarily recruit. So to get them all to buy in that same culture, it's taken a little time, but you're seeing it. You're seeing the difference now than you saw maybe the last 2 or 3 years. You're seeing the players who actually are starting to get some of that. They believe, they buy into what's going on here. Now, it's a few of those guys. Now, next year, hopefully that can grow and you get more and more guys and you see that culture kind of take over. That's where I think they're going to have success. I don't necessarily believe it's X's and O's. I mean, he hasn't done anything at all like they did the first time around. The UCF fast, the fast-paced tempo offense, that doesn't exist now. I mean, they don't have the players and personnel right now to do that. So they've just been very generic in a lot of ways with their offense. I think that'll change in the future. But to me, the culture part was huge. If you can get the culture to make that shift, if you can get away from the me, mercenary-type free agent thing that goes on with college football now with NIL and revenue share, I think that's going to be huge. I think that's going to be said at any coach in any sport right now in college athletics. If you can get that culture going, I think that's where you start to kind of build that foundation and you can go from there. So I think that's what he's done so far. Now, if he can continue to keep that going, I think they have a chance to start to build some success. But it's going to take time, and again, and unfortunately, it's also going to take money, as we've seen over the last couple of years.
So there's a ton of talent in Florida. We all know that, but the whole country knows that, and the whole country recruits there, so there's a ton of competition. But the rules have changed since Scott Frost was there. Now you can transfer and you don't have to sit out. How are they doing with bounce-back kids who go somewhere and find everybody does have their hand out and they were promised more than has ever been delivered and they want to get back closer to home? How are they doing with those kids?
That's really where I think they're hitting on, and that's kind of their message to a lot of these guys is, okay, we may not get them the first time around. We may not get these guys out of high school, but we kind of are still there in their ear letting them know, like, hey, man, we're here. So when these guys go elsewhere, and like you just mentioned, maybe they're not having the success they're having, or maybe they don't like their NIL deal, or maybe they don't think that things are going well, then UCF can come back and grab some of those guys. You've seen some of that. They brought in a lot of Florida guys who have had some success. Dylan Wade, for instance, their talented tight end who leads the team in receiving. He was the guy that went off to Maryland. He's a Florida guy. He's come back. They brought in some guys that they believe. Miles Montgomery was a guy who running back, who's a Florida guy who basically talked about this idea of how coming back to UCF saved him. Mentally, like it saved him. He felt like this really kind of changed things. Those are the kind of the things that I think Scott Frost and his staff have done a really good job of is saying, okay, we're not going to get you maybe the first time. Maybe we're not going to win every recruiting battle because we don't have the money that some of the schools are throwing out there for recruits. But if we can kind of pitch the idea of like, yeah, come play in front of your family, play in front of, back home where you're not having to deal with it. Play in a state that doesn't have a sales tax, doesn't have income tax. You play in a state where you can benefit from these kind of things. I think they have a chance, and I think that's what they're trying to do. And it just takes time again to get the message out there and to make sure the players understand. Okay, there is a chance to go home and play at home and have some success and play in a Power 4 conference.
You think they can run the ball with any level of success against BYU?
I'm not sure. I mean, Miles Montgomery, their starting running back, has been banged up. He played a little bit last week. I think he led the team with about 60 yards. He's getting better. He was banged up. Jaden Nixon's done a good job. Jaden is more of a explosive type back who, you get him out on, if he can find a hole in the line, he can really kind of take something and turn a 2-yard run into a 12-yard run or a 40-yard run. I think their offensive line has to play better, and their offensive line is banged up. I mean, I don't know about BYU. I haven't gone that deep, but I mean, this is as beat up of an injured of a team as I've covered at UCF. I mean, they're down to 2 quarterbacks. Their offensive line is missing 2 starters. They've had multiple injuries, guys gone on the defensive side. They're just trying to fill holes. So I think they'll try to run the ball. Obviously, they'll try to mix it up a little bit. They need to, because Taven Jackson really can't just sit in the pocket and throw the ball 40 times. That's not his game, and it's not what UCF wants to do. And I think if they get to that point and they become one-dimensional, I think it's going to be a long day for them.
Jackson has 8 touchdowns and 8 picks. I see 5 different quarterbacks on the stat sheet. 4 of them have thrown interceptions. They have more interceptions than touchdown passes as a team. So if we're looking for problems, is that problem number 1 after, I guess, the O-line injuries?
Yeah, I think the quarterback situation didn't go anywhere near what they would like to. I mean, this has been it's not just a Scott Frost problem, by the way. This is something UCF has struggled with over the last couple of years. They've had issues at quarterback. Last year, they used 4 different starters. They had 4 different guys start games last year, and those weren't due to injuries. Those were just coaches deciding, Gus Malzahn deciding to change a quarterback because he was trying to create a spark. This year, it's been all injuries. I mean, they started Cam Fancher. He lasted all of 1 quarter, got hurt. Taven Jackson came in, led him to a win. Taven started a couple games, then he got hurt. Cam came back. Their backup, Ja'Cory Brown, came in. He got banged up and has a strained AC joint issue. The only one that I don't think has been hurt is Dobby Belfort, who's the 4th stringer, and he's right now the backup to Taven Jackson. So it's been an unbelievable, thin group. And I think one of the things I've asked Scott about is, how do you build consistency on the offense if you've got guys coming in and out? And that's been the biggest issue, is they just don't have guys who have been 100% healthy that can go through week in and week out and build that consistency on offense. And then plus, when your offensive line is thin and you're bringing in different guys at different spots, it can be challenging as well to try to get guys to find some consistency. Taven told us after the game on Saturday that he's been dealing with knee issues, most of the season. And, he's still going to play, but, you can clearly not 100%. And I think some of that has led to some of the interceptions as well, because I think he's trying to do a little bit too much because he feels like he needs to.
They had lost 6 out of 7 going into Oklahoma State, and thank goodness for Oklahoma State if you're playing them, because everybody gets better when you play them, because they're just shockingly how good they were and how bad they are now. So they get that win barely, but they get it. Did that give them any form of momentum to provide incentive to let's get to 6 and get bowl eligible?
Yeah, I think they still feel like there's an opportunity here. Again, it's a it's going to be a huge challenge. But I mean, there's no one we've spoken with so far this week that has given us any. You get the impression that they're just mailing it in. This last week, I think they feel like they'd like to have an opportunity to play one more. To get a win and play in a bowl game. Getting to a bowl game would be huge for this program, just because of the fact. Not a lot of people thought they would be that spot. It also has a financial implication. Scott Frost, if they get to a bowl game in his first year, he gets an additional year to his contract, and it's a $5 million year. I mean, so there's a financial benefit if Scott gets his team to a bowl game. The challenge really for UCF in my mind, and I've written a little bit about it, is that they've been putrid on the road. I mean, they've lost 8 straight games. They've looked just it's almost like a different team when they get on the road. They haven't figured out a way to win on the road. They haven't won since last season. I think in early September they beat TCU by 1 point, in Dallas, and they've struggled on the road, especially the last couple of games. They lost, got blown out by Texas Tech, but who hasn't been almost? And then they really had a chance. They thought they got a chance at Baylor, and they were embarrassed at Baylor, 30-3. So that's the issue: is can they go on the road? Can they find a way to win? We've asked them, the coaching staff and the players, what can you do differently? They just talk about trying to fix things in practice, trying to make it. They're trying to get more energy. I think for them, if they can come out and try to get on the try to get things going faster, and maybe try to take advantage of some things, I think it'll help them. But they got to figure out a way to win on the road, especially in the Big 12, because that's something that's the only way you're going to find a way to be competitive is if you have to win away from your home.
0-4 on the road this year. The one time they looked, the final score anyway, looked decent was at Cincinnati. It was 20-11. Yeah. So at least that's somewhat representative. So when they play well on the road, what do they do? What is this potential strength or strengths that they can lean into? Because they're huge underdogs, obviously, at BYU.
Well, I think on the road for them, when they look good, is they got to get out strong. They've got to come out and put some points on the board early. I think part of the problem is they find themselves down early. Against Texas Tech scored with about a little over a minute to start the game, and all of a sudden they're down 7-0, and that's just not how you want to come out when you're on the road. And so I think for UCF, they got to find a way to score early, try to get themselves a little bit of momentum. I think defensively, they've got to find a way to create turnovers. If they can create some turnovers on the road, I think they have an opportunity, and they haven't been able to do that as much when they've been out there. And some of that is because they've been banged up on the defensive front. They need to get some pressure on quarterbacks. The defense, by the way, has been their MVP this year. There's no question about it. The defense has kept them in a lot of games and has really kind of helped them out. So defensively, they got to find a way to be disruptive, and they got to create turnovers. And I think if you can do that, and then offensively, if you can kind of grind out some, 8, 9, 10 play drives where it takes 3, 4, 5 minutes, I think you have an opportunity to do some of those. And you got to take care of the football. Taven Jackson has thrown at least one interception in the last 4 or 5 games. And that's something that isn't going to help you at all. You got to find a way to not create turnovers. You got to run the football. You got to mix things up. And, so that's where I think if they're going to have any chance to win on the road, they're going to have to find a way to get out there early, maybe to take the crowd out of it and not to get sucked into, some of these venues. I think that's part of it is, for some of these guys, they've never played in these kind of venues. They've never played in Waco. They never played at, in a venue like Texas Tech. They've never played anywhere near the size of maybe of LaVell Edwards Stadium. So, that's where they kind of get caught up a little bit. So you got to get them out of that mindset early.
Obviously, we're expecting BYU to win, and if they win, they get the opportunity to go to the Big 12 title game, and we're expecting Texas Tech to be there, and we're probably expecting Texas Tech to win. So follow me through the scenarios that I just put out there, and let's just go for argument's sake that the game is far more competitive between BYU and Tech than it was when they played in Lubbock on whenever it was a few weeks back, right? And so with that in mind, you got a competitive game against what I think clearly, obviously, is a top 10 team, maybe a top 5 team. And so BYU finishes 11-2 and plays Tech competitively. If they don't get into the playoff, I think that's a serious blow to the Big 12 to have an 11-2 team. And I know you're only supposed to look at this year, but they also went 11-2 last year. So with that type of glossy record and still not get in, if that were to happen, how big of a deal do you think it is and a negative for the Big 12?
I think it's a big deal. At some point, you're going to, if you're Brett Yormark, at some point you got to keep making the case that, you want to get multiple teams into the college football playoff. Yes, we know the SEC is going to get a few teams. Yes, Big Ten is going to get a few teams in. But on a year when the ACC is probably really, really weak,
right?
You're not even sure who's going to be in the ACC. I think there's no excuse why you couldn't get 2 teams in. I think what hurts too is you got Notre Dame being an independent. Notre Dame can find its way in, depending on what happens. So you're trying to make the case to get 2 teams in. And if it doesn't happen this year, then you really got to start thinking about what's the future of the playoff. Does that mean, okay, maybe that pushes Brett to say, we need to expand, we need to go to 16, we need to go to 18, whatever they're thinking, 24, if that happens, because you want to give more opportunities to schools like that. I know it doesn't help this year. It doesn't help BYU this year if that were to happen. That's something as a commissioner you have to be talking about, because you want to get as many teams as you can in there, because that's just going to showcase the strength of your conference. And Brett has said it the last 2 years that, this conference is a conference of parity, but at some point you're going to need, you don't want just one team. You got to get 2 or 3 in there. You got to start building that, making that case that you've got 2 or 3 really good teams playing. And you want to be able to get them into the playoff situation and see what they can do. And if that doesn't happen, then you really got to take that serious look at what's the future for. What can you do to make this work? Because, it's frustrating. Especially if that happens and BYU doesn't get in, that's frustrating to do 2 years and have that happen. 11 wins and not find yourself in that playoff mix. So I think that's the question that's got to come from this. Now, if BYU gets in, let's say they lose to Tech and they still get in, then I think they'll still talk about how they can expand the playoff, but I think it's not necessarily as a big of a push. But I definitely know Brett is watching this pretty closely to see what happens, because he wants to see where this is all going to end up and do what's best for his conference.
With that in mind, should he pivot then? Because I get why he said, hey, it should be earned on the field, but should he just take the 2 automatic qualifiers? Because they're not going to let you earn it on the field. If BYU loses a conference title game and they're 22-4, and 3 of the 4 losses are to conference championship teams in 2 years, and they still can't get in as an at-large, I think the message to the Big 12 is pretty clear.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Brett's going to have to think about, really hard. And believe me, I'm sure the BYU representation is going to be in his ear about it. I'm sure there's some other schools that are going to be talking to him about it, saying, listen, if we can't get this in, we need to think about, we need to pivot and think about what our philosophy is, because you want to try to get as many teams in. And it's frustrating for schools to put the investment in. And this is now where the college football has changed, because it's an investment now financially. You're putting a lot of money into a program, into a team, and if you're not getting to the goal of the college football playoff, is this how it's supposed to be? We got to figure this out, because why are we making this big investment if it's not going to turn out that we can only get 1 or 2 teams in? And I think that's where Brett's got to sit down and have a hard conversation, because it's easy to say that hypothetically when you're just talking about, okay, yeah, we can get, we'll take this team or that team, but when you start seeing it happen year in and year out, that's when it becomes the challenge. And that's where your members say, listen, it's great and all, but we need to get the results here. And that could be where we could see some change. Listen, they're not going to change. They announced yesterday that, they're going to push back the discussion for the possible deadline for to put forth a plan for the future of the college football playoff till January 23rd. Well, that's just convenient, because that opens the door for them to see what happens. If BYU doesn't get in this scenario, that all of a sudden changes the philosophy. You get a chance to see that in person. And I think that would be something that would definitely make them say, we've got to make a change. The problem they're going to have is we've been talking about changing the playoff for what is almost a year now, over a year now. They haven't come anywhere close to doing it. And I don't believe they're going to. I still think it's going to be a 12-team playoff next year. And I think it's until they can come up with a reasonable plan, I just don't think it changes. You can't get these people to agree on anything. So, Brett may change his mind and say, let's go more, but he's got to convince other people to do the same thing. So that's going to be the challenge moving forward with this plan and how they do it with the playoff.
Matt, we appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us. Good to talk football with you. Thanks for coming on the air.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
Matt Murschel right there, UCF and college football writer for the Orlando Sentinel. It feels like the only way BYU loses this game is if they turn it over 4 or 5 times. When I hear about a beat-up offensive line, they don't throw the ball very well. They still don't have, as a team, they don't have 10 touchdown passes. They haven't scored a point in the first quarter of any of their road games. They haven't won a road game. This just all lines up that BYU ought to do this.
Yeah, I can't disagree on that whatsoever. It's just a question of, does Kalani go for style points?
Yes, to a degree, subtly.
Which, man, 11-1 speaks for itself.
You'd like to think, but I'm just not convinced it will. I hope it does. Yeah, it should.
this is a culmination of the regular season, of an outstanding regular season, and the seniors and any other underclassmen who decide they want to go through the ceremony, if they might leave, as far as the NFL goes and all that. I don't think they want you to do it if you know you're going to be you're going to transfer. I think it's the design.
Need to rename it Senior and Transfer Day. If you know you're going to be
Senior
leaving the
NFL
university.
draft and transfer.
Like
There you go,
Lobo
yeah.
and the Fano brothers, they went through because I think they're thinking NFL.
Correct.
And that's okay, but not the, hey, I'm out of here.
I'm out of here, man.
Hey, so
I'm
there's a
going
thing
to
called
Fresno State.
Exactly.
See ya.
I'm going up to Utah State next month.
Yeah, so that's not what they're looking for. But I think it'll be a fine day. It'll be a cold day, but it'll be a fine day. It'll be a warm day in Provo if they lose this game.
Everything you missed in this show next, and 2 more Jazz tickets to see the Jazz and the Sacramento Kings Friday night. We'll give them away on the other side of this break. Stay with us.